there's a good chance you've misunderstood what genius actually looks like. You picture the loudest person in the room, the one who finishes your sentences, the one who raises their hand before the question is even done. Confident, sharp, unmissable. Now forget that, because psychologists have noticed a pattern that surprises most people. The smartest people you'll ever meet are often the quietest ones in the room, the ones who left the party early, the ones who said, "I don't know," and meant it, the ones everyone assumed were a little off. What if the traits you've spent your whole life trying to hide, the overthinking, the loneliness, the restlessness, the feeling like you never quite fit, what if those weren't flaws at all? What if they were 11 traits of a mind operating in a very different way? Stay with me, because by the end of this, you might realize you've been misreading yourself for years. A high IQ isn't just about thinking faster. It's about experiencing the world differently. Some moments stay with you long after everyone else has forgotten them. A simple conversation can turn into hours of reflection. A mistake from years ago can still teach you something new. Your mind doesn't simply collect information. It keeps searching for meaning. That's the part most people never hear. Intelligence isn't just about how quickly you solve problems or how impressive you sound. Sometimes, it's about how deeply life reaches you, how many patterns you notice, how many questions refuse to leave, and how impossible it can be to simply switch your mind off. And if that sounds familiar, the next 11 traits may help explain why. Sign 1. They need solitude to think clearly. Have you ever canceled plans? Not because you were tired of people, but because the thought of one more conversation felt heavier than the comfort of being alone? To someone else, it might have looked like withdrawal. They may have called you distant, quiet, even antisocial. But what they couldn't see was what was happening beneath the surface. For some people, silence isn't empty. It's where the mind finally has room to work. Without the constant stream of conversations, notifications, and expectations, scattered thoughts begin to connect. Questions that had no answers start finding their shape. Ideas that seemed unrelated suddenly make sense. Some psychological research suggests that people with higher cognitive ability often report getting less satisfaction from frequent social interaction than others. Not because they dislike people, but because periods of quiet seem to give their minds something they constantly need: uninterrupted space to reflect. For a mind like that, being alone isn't about escaping the world. It's about finally having enough silence to hear your own thoughts. Sign 2. Their mind never fully turns off. Have you ever been lying in bed at 2 a.m., exhausted, begging your own brain to just stop? Not stop thinking about anything important. Just stop. Replaying a conversation from 6 years ago. Solving a problem nobody asked you to solve. Building an argument for a debate that isn't even happening. To everyone else, it looks like anxiety, or overthinking, or a bad habit you simply need to outgrow. But what if it's not a malfunction at all? Some psychologists describe this as a kind of restless mental energy, a drive to think that doesn't come with an off switch. Other research suggests that some highly intelligent minds may form unusually rich connections across different parts of the brain, linking ideas that most people would never naturally connect. It isn't always comfortable, but sometimes it's simply what a relentlessly curious mind feels like. Sign 3. They feel everything, they just don't show it. Have you ever cried at a movie nobody else even remembers the ending of? Or felt a stranger's grief on the news like it happened to someone you loved? And then, an hour later, someone asks if you're okay, and you say, "I'm fine," because that's easier than explaining what just moved through you. People assume intelligence means detachment, the cool, logical mind that stays above the noise, unbothered, unshaken. But that's not what the research shows. Some psychologists describe highly sensitive, highly intelligent minds as having a heightened responsiveness to the world around them, to beauty, to injustice, to the quiet suffering of people they've never even met. The feeling isn't smaller. It's just better hidden. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that showing how deeply something affected you wasn't always safe. So you got good at holding it in. Good enough that people started believing you didn't feel much at all. They were wrong. You didn't feel less. You just learned how to carry more of it, quietly. Sign 4. They're the ones who say, "I don't know," and mean it. You've sat in rooms full of people speaking with total certainty about things they barely understand. And you stayed quiet. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you actually knew how complicated the answer was. Later, someone called you unsure of yourself, indecisive, maybe even less confident than everyone else at the table. Here's what they missed. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the most informed one. Psychologists call this the Dunning-Kruger effect. The less someone understands a subject, the less they're able to see how much they're missing. Confidence, in that case, is an insight. It's a blind spot. You, on the other hand, have gone deep enough into things to see the exceptions, the gray areas, the parts nobody warned you about. So when you say, "I don't know," it was never hesitation. It was precision. And precision has never needed to be loud to be right. Sign 5. They long for conversations that go deeper. You've had that conversation. The one where you're 3 questions deep into something you're genuinely excited about, and you watch the other person's eyes glaze over. So you stop. You pull back. You give the shorter, simpler version instead. Not because you think less of them, but because you've learned, over and over again, that not every conversation is looking for the same kind of depth. That's a quiet kind of loneliness people rarely talk about. Psychologist Lita Hollingworth, who spent decades studying highly gifted adults, described something she called stimulus poverty, the experience of a mind that rarely finds enough intellectual challenge or depth in its everyday environment. She wasn't describing arrogance or superiority. She was describing an unmet hunger for conversations that stay curious, keep asking questions, and aren't afraid to follow an idea all the way to the bottom. Over time, many people learn to calibrate themselves. They simplify the thought before it leaves their mouth. They stop asking the second question, then the third, not because they have nothing more to say, but because they've learned that not every room is built for that kind of conversation. And sometimes, the most curious part of who they are never gets introduced. Sign 6. They change their mind when the evidence changes. You've believed something with your whole heart, defended it, built part of your identity around it. And then, one day, new information appeared, and instead of holding on tighter, you let it change your mind. Some people saw that as inconsistency, unreliable. Why can't you just pick a side and stick with it? But changing your mind isn't always a sign of weakness. Sometimes, it's a sign that you're still paying attention. Psychologists call this cognitive flexibility, the ability to treat beliefs as working theories rather than fixed identities. When convincing new evidence appears, the mind updates its understanding instead of protecting an old conclusion. The goal isn't to win every argument. It's to get a little closer to what's true. That isn't always easy. Changing your mind can cost you certainty. It can cost you pride. Sometimes, it can even cost you belonging. But people who remain open to evidence, even when it's uncomfortable, often understand that being wrong isn't the problem. Stopping the search for better answers is. Sign 7. They watch long before they ever speak. You've sat in meetings where everyone else was already talking, and you were still watching, reading the room, noticing who went quiet when a certain name came up, noticing what nobody was saying out loud. By the time you finally spoke, someone had already assumed you didn't have much to add, but they hadn't seen what you were doing. Some research on social intelligence suggests that people who are skilled at reading social dynamics often spend more time observing before responding. It's not necessarily because they're slower to think, but because they're gathering more information before reaching a conclusion. While others were already reacting, you were still connecting the dots. Watching patterns take shape before deciding what they meant. Of course, not every quiet person is quietly analyzing the room. Sometimes silence is simply silence. But when observation comes before opinion, it can lead to a deeper understanding of what's really happening beneath the conversation. Sometimes, the people who speak last have been listening the longest. Sign 8. They procrastinate hardest on the work that matters most. The email that could change your career has been sitting in your drafts for 3 weeks. Meanwhile, you answered 40 other emails today without thinking twice. It's not laziness. You know that, even if it doesn't feel that way at 11 p.m., staring at a blank page you've opened and closed a dozen times. Here's what's actually happening. Before you've written a single word, some part of your mind has already seen the whole thing. Every flaw it might have, every way it could fall short of what you know it could be. That kind of clarity is a gift most of the time, but it can also make starting feel unbearable. Psychologist Carol Dweck's research on high-achieving, gifted individuals found something similar. It's rarely fear of failing outright. It's the gap between what you can already picture and what you're afraid you'll actually produce. Of course, procrastination isn't always this. Sometimes it really is just avoidance or a bad habit worth breaking. But when it's the projects that matter most that keep getting pushed to tomorrow, that's not carelessness. That's caring so much, it's hard to begin. Sign 9. They get bored faster than almost anyone around them. You've quit hobbies you were genuinely good at, switched careers more than once, rearranged the furniture again, just because the room felt too familiar. To other people, it looks like restlessness, maybe even a lack of discipline. Why can't you just stick with something? But something else might be going on underneath. Some neuroscience research suggests that, for some people, the brain's reward system may respond especially strongly to novelty and intellectual challenge. That may help explain why familiar routines lose their sense of excitement more quickly than they do for others. What satisfied you yesterday doesn't always satisfy you today. Sometimes your attention naturally starts looking for the next question before the current one feels completely finished. Of course, boredom alone doesn't mean much. Everyone gets restless sometimes. But if you've spent your whole life being the one who needed the next thing, the next challenge, the next unfamiliar room, maybe what kept pulling you forward wasn't a lack of commitment. It was a mind that stayed curious a little longer than most. Sign 10. They question themselves more than anyone would expect. You've replayed a decision you made months ago, wondering if you got it right. Not because you're falling apart, but because some part of you is still checking the math. From the outside, it looks like insecurity, maybe even a lack of confidence, especially next to people who seem so sure of everything they say. But there's another way to read it. Research on the Dunning-Kruger effect suggests that as people's understanding of a subject grows, they often become more aware of its complexity and of how much remains uncertain. In that light, confidence alone isn't always a reliable measure of understanding. Sometimes certainty reflects deep knowledge. Other times, it simply reflects not yet seeing the full complexity of a problem. Of course, self-doubt isn't always this. Sometimes doubt really is just doubt, and it deserves attention, not a reframe. But if you've spent years holding your own work to a standard nobody else seems to apply to themselves, treating every gap between what you meant and what you made as some kind of failure, maybe that wasn't weakness. Maybe it was simply a mind that never stopped asking whether there was something it had missed. Sign 11. They carry a quiet sense of not quite belonging. You've stood in a room full of people who like you, people who'd say you fit in just fine, and still felt something you couldn't quite name. Not sadness exactly, just distance. Like you were standing slightly outside a window everyone else was inside of. You've probably tried to explain it before and given up halfway through, because the words never quite matched the feeling. Here's a thought. What if it was never about the room? A mind that needs solitude to think, that never fully turns off, that feels everything and shows almost none of it, that watches longer than it speaks, doubts itself more than it should, and keeps searching long after everyone else is settled. A mind like that may experience the world differently, lingering on details, questions, and connections that other people might simply pass by. And when your attention naturally lingers on details, deeper questions, or experiences that others may not focus on, a little bit of distance isn't a flaw. Sometimes, Feeling a little out of step doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It may simply mean your way of experiencing the world doesn't always match the pace of the people around you. Of course, that feeling isn't proof of anything by itself. Plenty of people feel like outsiders for reasons that have nothing to do with how their mind works. But if you've spent your whole life quietly checking the 10 things before this one, the solitude, the racing mind, the buried feelings, the guessed at answers, the conversations that never went deep enough, the changed opinions, the watching, the unstarted work that mattered most, the boredom, the doubt, then maybe the distance was never something broken in you. Maybe it was simply the space between the questions your mind keeps asking and the answers everyday life is usually prepared to give. Maybe that's why these 11 signs matter. 11 things. Maybe you saw yourself in one of them. Maybe you saw yourself in all 11. If you did, here's what we'd ask you to remember. None of this was ever about being better than anyone else. It was never a scoreboard. It was about finally putting words to experiences that never seemed to fit into simple explanations. Why solitude never felt like loneliness. Why your mind wouldn't stop, even when you begged it to. Why, I don't know. Always felt more honest than pretending you did. Maybe you've spent years thinking something was slightly wrong with you. Maybe the goal was never to become more like everyone else. Maybe it was simply to understand yourself a little more clearly. There's a good chance you've misunderstood what genius actually looks like. But maybe the bigger misunderstanding was never about genius. Maybe it was about yourself. If this described you today, tell us which one hit hardest. We read every single comment. And if someone came to mind while you were watching, send this to them. They may have been trying to find words for these feelings too. We'll see you in the next one.